It's strange how a person can be exhausted and still unable to rest, as if something inside keeps pacing long after the day is over. Most people assume calm comes from fixing life's circumstances, yet sometimes peace slips in only when nothing is fixed at all. There's a quiet relief in realizing that the unrest isn't a personal failure. It may just be an unheard part of you waiting patiently. This story begins with someone who tried everything to escape that feeling, only to discover the gentlest way through it. And if you've ever felt that subtle ache of never fully settling, you may recognize yourself sooner than you expect. He often felt like someone who had sat down to rest but forgotten how to lean back. Even on quiet afternoons, his shoulders stayed half raised, as if expecting an invisible tap. People said he looked calm, yet inside something kept pacing in small, tired circles. It puzzled him, this inability to arrive where he already was. Sometimes he wondered if rest was a place others visited, but he somehow missed. At night, when the world softened and windows dimmed one by one, the unease grew louder. Silence didn't soothe him. It pressed gently, like a question waiting to be answered. He would reach for little distractions, a screen, a snack, a reason to stand up again. Not because he wanted them, but because stillness felt like holding his breath too long. It was strange, being exhausted and restless at the very same time. On a park bench one morning, he noticed how people could simply sit and watch pigeons. They seemed settled inside themselves, like cups filled exactly to the brim. He tried to imitate them, hands folded, eyes soft, breathing slow. Within seconds, a flicker of discomfort ran through him, subtle but insistent, as if some hidden part of him refused to be left alone in the quiet. He couldn't name what felt disconnected. Life was fine, nothing obviously broken. Yet moments slipped past him like scenery seen through a train window. Pleasant, but distant, never quite touching where he lived inside. He caught himself wondering when he had last felt fully present without effort. The thought lingered like a melody he almost recognized. And once, in a rare pause between one distraction and the next, a softer question surfaced. What if the soul remembered a kind of calm the mind had simply forgotten? The idea didn't arrive loudly. It settled beside him, patient and unhurried. He didn't know whether to trust it, but he didn't push it away either. Somewhere in that quiet wondering, the first small opening appeared. In the days that followed, he began noticing how often he moved without needing to. Not purposeful movement, just the kind that keeps thoughts from catching up. He would rearrange objects on his desk, check the window, then check it again. It dawned on him gently that he wasn't searching for something outside. He was circling around something within, careful not to touch it. One afternoon he paused mid-step, unsure why he had stood up at all. The room was quiet, the air still, nothing demanding his attention. For a fleeting second, he didn't rush to fill the space. And in that small gap, the restlessness didn't grow. It softened, almost as if it had been waiting to be noticed rather than escaped. He started experimenting in shy, almost secret ways. When tension rose, he placed a hand lightly on his chest and breathed once, slowly. Not a technique, not a task, just a brief acknowledgement. I'm here. The sensation felt awkward at first, like wearing a coat that wasn't his. Yet something inside him loosened, a knot easing without explanation. It occurred to him that calm might not live at the end of effort. Maybe it appeared when the running stopped, even for a moment. Like a shy animal stepping out only when the forest goes still. He had been chasing peace as if it were ahead of him somewhere. What if it had been waiting behind him all along? That evening, he sat by the window with nothing in his hands. The unease stirred, then settled when he didn't react to it. He felt oddly seen from the inside, as though some quiet part of him nodded. Not fixed, not healed, just acknowledged and allowed to exist. And though he didn't realize it yet, something in him had begun to listen back. His name was Elias. Though few people noticed him enough to use it, he had mastered the art of appearing occupied, even when nothing truly needed doing. If a room fell quiet, he would hum softly or shuffle papers that didn't matter. Noise, however small, felt like a thin blanket against a chill he couldn't explain. Without it, he felt exposed, as if silence could see straight through him. Mornings were the hardest. Before the world gathered its usual clatter, he would turn on the radio not to listen, but to keep the air from feeling empty. Coffee brewed longer than necessary, just to delay the stillness of waiting. He told himself it was habit, though it felt closer to avoidance. Stopping meant risking whatever might rise in the pause. Once, during a brief power outage, the apartment fell completely silent. No hum of appliances, no distant traffic, only the faint rhythm of his breathing. His chest tightened, and he stood up immediately, pacing without direction. It wasn't fear exactly, more like the anticipation of something unnamed. He opened a drawer, closed it, then opened it again, unsure what he needed. There were memories he preferred not to meet head-on. Sharp words from years ago, a door that closed too firmly, a look of disappointment. They hovered at the edges of quiet moments like silhouettes at dusk. He suspected that if he stopped long enough, they would step forward. So he kept moving, politely, persistently, like someone avoiding eye contact. Yet beneath all that motion lived a tired wish to finally rest. Not sleep, he slept, but a deeper settling he couldn't manufacture. Sometimes he imagined placing his burdens on a table and stepping away, just for a minute, just to see who he was without carrying them. He didn't know how close he was to discovering that moment. On a high shelf near his window sat a small brass bird cage he had found at a street market. Inside it hung a delicate paper bird, suspended by a nearly invisible thread. Whenever a draft slipped through the room, the bird would flutter frantically in tight circles. Elias hadn't planned to keep it. Somehow it had followed him home anyway. He told himself it was decorative, though he checked on it more often than he admitted. What unsettled him was how the bird moved most when the apartment grew quiet. In silence, even the faintest shift of air sent it trembling against the bars. The soft tapping echoed in the still room, fragile yet impossible to ignore. He would glance at it, then quickly look away, as if caught in a private thought. It mirrored a tension he couldn't quite name but instantly recognized. Some evenings he tried steadying it with a fingertip through the cage door. For a second the bird would rest, then resume its restless flutter the moment he withdrew. Control, he realized, lasted only as long as he held it in place. The instant he let go, the agitation returned, patient and persistent. It was a quiet demonstration he didn't know how to interpret yet. He began to notice how his own breath affected it. When he exhaled sharply, the paper wings shivered as if startled. When he breathed slowly, almost cautiously, the movement softened. He found himself matching his breathing to calm the tiny figure. Not intentionally, just a small instinct he hadn't practiced before. One night, sitting alone with the lamp dimmed, he watched it settle briefly. The stillness felt shared, as though both of them were pausing at the same time. A strange tenderness rose in him, unexpected and oddly relieving. He didn't yet see the connection, only that the cage held more than paper and thread. Somewhere in that fragile motion, his inner world had found its reflection. A few days later, Elias carried the little cage to a repair shop at the corner. The hook had bent, and he worried it might fall, though he couldn't say why that mattered. The shop was quiet, filled with clocks that ticked without competing. Behind the counter stood an older woman who seemed entirely at ease in the hush. She looked up with a soft smile, as if she had been expecting something gentle to arrive. When he placed the cage on the counter, the paper bird trembled wildly. She didn't reach for it right away. She simply watched, hands resting calmly. "It's not broken," she said after a moment, her voice unhurried. "It just hasn't learned that the air can be kind." Elias blinked, unsure whether she meant the bird or something else entirely. He explained, a little awkwardly, that it never stopped fluttering when the room was quiet. She nodded as if he had described a familiar weather pattern. Instead of adjusting the cage, she stepped back and softened her breathing. Gradually, almost shyly, the bird's frantic motion eased into a gentle sway. "See," she murmured, "stillness invites what force only frightens." Elias felt something in his chest respond, a small easing he hadn't asked for. She didn't offer advice, didn't analyze, didn't rush to fill the silence. Her presence was like a chair that didn't wobble when you finally sat down. He noticed his shoulders lowering, inch by inch, without instruction. It was the first time quiet had felt shared rather than endured. Before handing the cage back, she met his eyes with a knowing kindness. "Calm isn't something you make happen," she said softly. "It's something you allow to come closer." He left the shop carrying the same object, yet it felt subtly different in his hands. And though he didn't realize it yet, he had just met someone who knew the language of his unrest. Many of the stories you hear here aren't just stories. They reflect the invisible weight you may be carrying every day. If you're tired of holding pain, responsibility, and guilt that were never yours, I created an ebook called The Weight of Stones That Are Not Yours and More Too Bonus for You. It's for those who want to let go, set boundaries, and live with more lightness. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. Elias returned to the little shop the next afternoon. though nothing else needed fixing. The woman was watering a plant near the window, moving with unhurried care. He stood there a moment, unsure how to explain why he had come back. She saved him the trouble by simply nodding toward a chair beside her. It felt less like an invitation and more like permission to stop pretending. They sat without speaking, the kind of silence that didn't ask to be filled. After a while, she placed the birdcage between them on the floor. "Watch what happens when no one interferes," she said quietly. The paper bird fluttered at first, then slowed as the room settled around it. Elias noticed his own breathing matching the rhythm without trying. "The soul is similar," she continued, almost as if speaking to the air. "It quiets when it knows it won't be rushed away." He felt a flicker of recognition, like hearing his name in a crowded place. All those years of distraction suddenly looked less like habits and more like hiding. Not from the world, but from feelings waiting patiently to be noticed. She showed him a small practice, so simple it felt almost foolish. "Place your hand here," she said, touching her own chest lightly. "Breathe once as if you're greeting someone tired inside you." He did, awkward at first, then softer the second time. Something warm moved through him, not dramatic, just quietly relieving. "Restlessness often guards what hasn't been welcomed yet," she added. Elias glanced at the cage, where the bird now swayed gently on its thread. For the first time, he didn't feel the urge to steady it himself. He understood, or nearly understood, that space could soothe what pressure could not. And a quiet curiosity began unfolding in him, wondering what else might settle if given room. After that day, Elias didn't rush to change his life all at once. He simply began allowing small pockets of quiet to remain undisturbed. When discomfort surfaced, he stayed seated a few seconds longer than usual. Not bravely, not perfectly, just enough to notice he could survive it. The feeling would rise, hover, then soften like a wave losing its shape. The first time he resisted turning on the radio, the silence felt enormous. His hands twitched toward the switch, then paused midway. He remembered the woman's words and placed a hand on his chest instead. One slow breath, then another, as if greeting an old ache politely. To his surprise, the urge to escape loosened its grip. Even the bird in the cage began to change its restless dance. It still fluttered when sudden drafts crossed the room, but not for long. More often it swayed gently, as though learning a quieter language. Elias found himself watching it without tension, almost fondly. It no longer looked trapped, just sensitive to the air around it. There were difficult moments, of course, sharp memories that surfaced uninvited. A careless remark from a coworker, a familiar sting of rejection, a flicker of shame. He felt the old impulse to drown them in noise or motion. Instead, he tried something new, naming the feeling softly under his breath. "I see you," he whispered once, and the tightness eased a fraction. Little by little, stillness stopped feeling like an empty room. It became more like a quiet shoreline where thoughts could arrive and depart. He even caught himself sitting without purpose, just watching light move across the wall. The bird rested beside him, barely stirring, as if keeping him company. And somewhere deep inside, a long, tired part of him began to trust the silence. One afternoon, a sharp exchange at work caught him off guard. A colleague's impatient tone landed heavier than the words themselves. Normally, Elias would carry that sting for hours, replaying it in restless loops. He felt the familiar surge rising, quick and insistent. For a moment, it seemed the old agitation had returned unchanged. His hands twitched toward his phone, ready to disappear into distraction. Then he remembered the gentle sway of the paper bird at home. He let his hands rest on the desk instead, palms open, unmoving. One quiet breath slipped in, then out, unnoticed by anyone else. The tension didn't vanish, but it stopped multiplying. When he finally spoke, his voice surprised him by sounding steady. Not defensive, not sharp, simply clear and calm. The conversation softened as if meeting less resistance. Even the colleague's expression shifted, confusion giving way to ease. It was strange how composure could ripple outward without effort. Later, in the crowded bus ride home, someone bumped into him without apology. The irritation flared, then paused when he noticed his own tightening jaw. He imagined the small bird settling instead of thrashing at the bars. A slow exhale, a slight unclenching of his shoulders. The moment passed through him rather than lodging inside. By the time he reached his apartment, the day felt lighter than expected. He hung his coat, glanced at the cage, and found the bird gently swaying. Not perfectly still, not disturbed, simply at ease in its small world. Elias smiled, a quiet recognition warming his chest. He was beginning to understand that calm could travel with him. That evening, Elias sat by the window as the sky faded into a soft blue-gray. He wasn't trying to achieve anything, which still felt oddly unfamiliar. The room held a gentle quiet, like a pause between two notes of music. He noticed how his body kept expecting a reason to get up. Instead, he stayed, letting the moment remain unfinished. He placed both feet on the floor and rested his hands loosely on his knees. The position felt simple, almost ordinary, yet grounding in a subtle way. He took one slow breath, then another, just enough to feel the air move. No counting, no effort, only noticing that he was here. It was the smallest practice, barely noticeable from the outside. A memory surfaced unexpectedly, carrying a faint ache with it. Normally, he would have pushed it aside like a chair in the way. This time, he let it sit beside him, uninvited but not unwelcome. He imagined placing it gently inside the bird cage for a moment. The bird fluttered once, then settled as if acknowledging the offering. He realized anyone could do this, anywhere, without preparation. On a bus, in a hallway, even standing in line at a store. Just a brief pause to feel the breath and the weight of one's own body, allowing whatever feeling was present to exist without commentary. A quiet reunion with the part of oneself that never left. As the room darkened, Elias lit a small lamp and watched the cage glow softly. The bird swayed in a slow, peaceful arc, unhurried and unafraid. He felt the same motion inside his chest, gentle and steady. Not a grand transformation, just a quiet returning. And he sensed there was one last understanding still waiting to unfold. Days later, Elias carried the little birdcage to the park where everything had first felt distant. Morning light filtered through the trees, settling softly on the bench beside him. He placed the cage down and noticed the bird resting without a single frantic motion. The air moved, the world moved, yet the tiny figure remained at ease. It looked less like something contained and more like something at home. He realized then that calm had never been a place he needed to reach. It was the space that appeared when he stopped running past himself. All the years of searching had been a long detour around a quiet center. He felt no urge to hurry away from the stillness anymore. For the first time, being present didn't feel like effort. A child's laughter rang out nearby, bright and uncomplicated. Elias watched the sound ripple through the morning without disturbing his peace. He placed a hand on his chest, not out of necessity but gratitude. There was a softness there now, like soil after gentle rain. Something in him had become a place he could rest inside. When a cool breeze passed through the park, the bird swayed lightly. Elias smiled, recognizing the movement as natural rather than alarming. Life would always bring drafts, sharp words, lonely evenings, sudden memories. But the cage no longer felt like a prison, only a shelter for something delicate. He understood that a soothed soul travels quietly, carrying its own refuge. As he stood to leave, he didn't rush, didn't check for distractions. The path ahead felt ordinary and somehow welcoming at the same time. He carried the cage loosely, no longer guarding it with anxious care. Wherever he went, the calm moved with him, unannounced and steady, and the morning seemed to open gently, as if recognizing one of its own.